Larry, let's discuss the new legislation introduced to possibly deny student visas to Chinese nationals. And maybe some things people aren't aware of, that the CCP uses Chinese nationals.
Yes.
But before we get into that, let me just say welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, and with me is our senior analyst, Laurence Sanford. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Joy.
And Larry recently wrote a paper on this subject titled China Student Visas. You can view his article and all of his articles on our website at www.ascf.us. Please sign up for our newsletter and consider a donation. Larry, are you for denying all student and research visas for Chinese nationals, or do you think this should be maybe a case-by-case basis?
Well, I think there shouldn't be restrictions placed. Right now we have approximately 270,000 plus Chinese nationals as students here in America. And they're studying primarily the STEM courses at the graduate level. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. In other words, critical slots in our educational system. And the universities like the Chinese students because they pay full tuition.
Oh, yes, I'm getting into that too.
They pay full tuition that the Chinese government is paying for primarily because they're getting the latest technologies and bringing them back to China. And almost all the students have graduated from college already, so they come here to the U.S. to go to our graduate programs and work with our laboratories, which primarily are financed by the American taxpayers. Federal money goes into, for example, the University of Michigan, MIT, Harvard, and all these laboratories and think tanks and research organizations primarily are funded by American taxpayers. And so, yeah, the Chinese are paying for the tuition, but they're using the multi-billion-dollar facilities paid for by American taxes. And they're just basically taking the cream of our technology and taking them back to China. And they present a security issue, too. Most recently, for example, in three graduate students in Michigan, University of Michigan, which is one of the elite universities in the United States, have been working on pathogens, biological pathogens, that could contaminate the American farmlands. And yet they're bringing these products into the United States, smuggling them in. And they've been caught, but who knows how many have come in other means and so forth. So
yes, we just heard about one coming across the Canada border.
Yeah, and not only the Chinese involved in taking our technology, basically stealing our technology.
Which has been going on for some time.
Been going on for years. But they're also cash mules for the fentanyl drug trade. There's so much cash is generated by the sale of fentanyl, which is the precursor chemicals are made in China, brought into Mexico, they're put together and made into fentanyl, smuggled up into the United States. There's so much cash generated, they have a hard time flowing it back to China, so they use cash mules to take the cash from the sales and funnel it through laundering operations of Chinese travel agencies and other areas. So they use as cash mules. They're used for spying. Chinese student was arrested down in the Norfolk area of Virginia, the largest military complex in the United States for the Navy and so forth, flying drones around. So they invade all sorts of other areas of our society.
And as your paper did discuss, and I want to make that point, is that we're not against the Chinese people themselves.
No.
I understand they would probably want to come here for a good education, but unfortunately the CCP, the Chinese government, is using them.
Yes, and our visa system, as you know, has been lax, and a lot of Chinese come and they just overextend their stay and are not sent back. So, yeah, I think I'm not saying we should totally ban them. I mean, there's 10,000 American students. Maybe we should just make a reciprocity program of 10,000 Chinese students for.
I thought you might say something.
Yeah. So, I'm not even sure 10,000 is a good number, but we certainly should be clamping down on Chinese students, especially studying and working in research labs. tied into high technology of artificial intelligence, biology,
Yes, yes.
military electronics. We should really clamp down on that whole area. So.
And getting back to your point about a lot of money coming into our universities, the fact that CCP may be one of the biggest contributors to elite universities, along with maybe Qatar and some others. But
yes,
will that money, if this goes into law, will that money adversely affect scholarships for American students?
Well, I don't know. I mean, one of the problems I think with American education, higher education, really started when the federal government started to give loans to students. I mean, the tuition just keeps on increasing, and federal involvement in the student loan program has corrupted billions of dollars of being defaulted by students. Obama nationalized student loans. They should be just defederalized and go back to private enterprise. So the student has to go to the bank or the lending authority and say, I need a loan to further my studies. And if they say, gee, I want to study in transgender women's studies, racial diversity, I suspect the loans will put a damper on those kind of studies, because if you major in those subjects, how are you going to get a job to pay them back? So,
and to your point, I just heard it today, over $1 trillion worth of student debt. Yes, a very big number. And I did hear, I believe in May, they were trying to put into effect where this repayment is going to have to happen. So we'll see.
And so the students aren't any better off studying in these areas where they can't make a dollar. And certainly society, and as a taxpayer, I don't want to subsidize people who can't pay back their loans.
So essentially, we shouldn't allow the Chinese money or any foreign money to influence American students' loans.
Well, it all goes back to the fundamentals. And the fundamental is that China is waging unrestricted warfare on the United States. And they're following the examples of Sun Tzu, the ancient philosopher, who said the best way to win a war is not to fight it, is to subvert the culture. And China, and I say China, I should say the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is infiltrating America on all levels, between students, drugs, TikTok. TikTok is a poison, just like fentanyl. It's poisoning our culture. And last but not least, they have funding of organizations, and they have frontmen like this Neville Singham, who's a billionaire who lives in Shanghai, an American citizen who had a think tank or IT kind of company he sold for $800 million, and he lives in Shanghai now. And he and his wife, Jody Evans, Code Pink founder, are subsidizing all sorts of Marxist programs. And these Marxist programs now are being discussed as funding the riots going on here in America. So the Chinese hand is also evident, or the CCP hand is also evident in these riots. And most people would question who's agitating on the riots.
Yes.
And where's the money coming from? Well, Singham has $1 billion, so he's funneling money into organizations. Some of the organizations are like the Party of Socialism and Liberation, or the People's Forum. So he funnels money into these things, and these people then funnel the money onto the street. And so we're hearing stories now of people being paid to be out there, agitators. They have expensive masks that they're wearing. So,
and of course, if you're a student, you're wanting to probably take that money and need that money as you're going through college.
Yeah, so they take the thing, and it's a big party. But the thing that puzzles me about the riots in LA is why the police aren't in more overwhelming numbers, and why, when they have the agitators, they don't form task force to go after the agitators. It only takes a few agitators to take the crowd into bad territory real quick.
Yes.
So nail those agitators, get them into our criminal system, and see what happens. I've told you the story about one of my favorite people in the 20th century was Lee Kuan Yew, Prime Minister of Singapore. And they had an immigrant problem from Indians. Singapore is basically a Chinese occupied, citizens of Chinese descent live in Singapore. And at one time it was sort of a sleepy backwater on the equator at the tip of Malaysia. And they formed their own state called Singapore. And now it's per capita probably the wealthiest or one of the wealthiest nations in the world. But they had an immigrant problem with Indians coming in there. And so Lee Kuan-yew was meeting with his cabinet, and they said, what are we going to do about it? He said, cane them. And by cane, I mean C-A-N-E. You whip them with a cane, and they'll go away. All 10,000 of them that are here illegally? He says, do one or two, and they'll all disappear. And so what we have to do is the same thing in these riots. We have to go after the agitators, set an example, arrest them, prosecute them. You can't let them go free. If you get the agitators, the leaders, the rest will go away.
Yes, it's no longer constitutional when it's not a protest that is in peace.
That's right. I mean, I have no problem.
This is no longer a peaceful protest.
Yeah, that's right. I have no problem with protesters. Most of those people out there aren't violent. And all it takes is a few of these agitators. And
so the ones breaking the law need to be arrested.
Yes. So.
Show an example.
Yeah. So the student visas with the Chinese. Yeah, we ought to start controlling the Chinese because they're stealing our secrets, they're poisoning our culture, and they're agitating on the riots in the cities.
And as you mentioned, using students to launder money here in the U.S. through fentanyl and other problems.
Yeah.
So certainly a thing to look at. And thank you for bringing up the riots and possible foreign money, because I'm sure a lot of other people have similar thoughts on this situation.
We have this green axis with the Islamic. We have the Islamic and the Marxist axis working together to bring down American society. And until you recognize that these people who are shouting death to Israel are really shouting death to America, then you can't solve the problem.
Well, and as you mentioned, if they subvert us from within, which they're doing a decent job of, we need to recognize that. And I want to bring up that point because peace through strength strategy, one of our strategies is vigilance.
Yes.
And I think we really need to be vigilant when it comes to really following the money, I guess.
Yeah.
And exposing not only the Chinese students that are being used by the CCP, but following the money that's being sent to these rioters and agitators.
Yes, absolutely. So peace through strength. You have to be strong, but you also have to identify the problem, because if you don't identify the problem, you can't solve the problem.
Well, thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you to our listeners. Subscribe, comment, and share your thoughts on denying Chinese nationals visas and also how we can follow the money. You can find us on our YouTube and Rumble channels. Please subscribe, comment, and share there, as well as following us on Twitter, Substack, and Facebook. You can also listen to our audio podcast on your favorite Apple or Android phone. So thank you again, Larry.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you to our listeners, and join us again next time for our Peace Through Strength podcast.